wanted to, in addition to thanking Dean Barbara Crow, I wanted to thank Nicole Light for all her assistance in organizing this time today. So this morning, I'm going to present on my reflections on an exhibition that I co-curated with Jim Drobnick. Together, we formed the curatorial collaborative DisplayCult, which for over 20 years has interrogated practices of display in the art world. Our projects have ranged, I'm just going to give you a little overview, from interrogating the performative genre of tableau vivant with CounterPoses. And these are like, it's a 19th century genre of living pictures where people would pose still as statues. And so we updated it a little bit and worked with contemporary artists and did a project in a whole building. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. Then we did an exhibition in conjunction with an international conference on the senses in art. And it was called Vital Signs. And we're looking at the non-visual senses in art, in addition to the visual. So, for example, this is the conference. On the upper right, you'll see the conference brochure. But for example, this is it's called a squeeze chaise-longue by Wendy Jacob. And if you got in it, you would feel this kind of, there's a pneumatic pump that would put you into an embrace. And this is research that was stemming from a woman, Temple Grandin, who is autistic. And it's been used for the humane slaughter of livestock and also calming of autistic people. And then extending our senses a little more precisely, we did a exhibition at the Monell Center in Philadelphia, which is a center that focuses on smell. And we called it Odor Limits and looked at smell art. And one example is an olfactory portrait of a building by an artist named Oswaldo Macia. And each of these garbage cans kind of had, olive oil in this case, or baby powder, just at the residence of the building. And finally, the last one I'll mention today is Museopathy, which was a interventional projects in the specialist museums and touristic sites of the entire city of Kingston. And so this is at the Miller Museum of Geology, where Fastworms did an intervention there. But one of my favorite pieces, and I'm only going to mention one, was a response to a piece in the Correctional Services Museum of Canada, which is a fascinating museum, still exists across from the former Kingston Penitentiary, and it's staffed by retired guards. And this is an escape pod made out of cafeteria trays that an inmate, must have spent a lot of time collecting and carving out in the shop off hours, and then finally made the escape because they shipped these things out to get them washed. But of course, he was apprehended. No one seems to get out except for one person, but that's another story. Okay, and then Diane Borsato did an intervention the day of the prom for the Royal Military College, and she took this artifact out of the museum, which is an Emerny Tower, a fortress tower, and took him to the prom. So his name's Mortimer. He's sort of a mascot for the university, and here she is posing with real RMC grads. So it's kind of a delightful day, and they went, drinking in bars and took romantic pictures and so forth. So that's just a little bit of a background. But today I'm going to speak, this is the season of Nuit Blanche, which is sort of impending in Toronto. And I'm going to speak about NIGHTSENSE, which is a project that Jim and I curated as part of the events in Toronto in 2009. Just a little context on Nuit Blanche. It started in 2002 and was launched in Paris, St. Petersburg, and Berlin. And these are like typically all-night events, which have become contact zones for powerful links between civic participation, marketing, and art spectacle. Cities all over the world, including Sao Paulo, Rome, Tel Aviv, Chicago, and in Canada, Montreal, Halifax, and Toronto, I think even Calgary now has something, have incorporated the nocturnal carnivalesque into their urban fabrics. The suspension of real time by carnivalesque time facilitates the radical reconceptualization of diverse public monuments, civic buildings, and urban streetscapes. So curating the zone encompassing Toronto's financial district provided the opportunity to work with sites deeply charged within the Canadian financial and telecommunication industries, as well as landmarks of transportation, media, and civic culture. A key curatorial concern was to amplify the erratic affects of these spaces. And what I mean by affect is sort of the feeling, the feeling, the mood, the ambience of these spaces. So we had to identify them and then work with those kind of ambiences. And we would insert rigorously conceptualized art projects that engaged the senses in certain ways. So we're still working with the senses, but then we have to, we were placed in the financial district, so we had to think about money, the senses, and affect, and Nuit Blanche. So so what happens, we asked our sort of framing question was, what happens when art and its symbolic and effective value system become the focus within the customary spaces of finance? It was an extraordinary opportunity to install artworks in the CN Tower, the Toronto Stock Exchange, Scotiabank, Royal Bank, CIBC, and B of M head offices, the Transit Center of Union Station, as well as some of the artists responded to the invisible radio waves in the region. Together, these artist projects shifted the atmosphere of this zone in particular ways that impacted on the ways it was perceived, enacted, and remembered. I would like to suggest that something extraordinary is happening when huge crowds of over 1 million people engage with contemporary art. Yet, while there is now a much broader involvement and interest in contemporary art than ever before, some facets of the art world remain ambivalent, disinterested, and even condescending towards Nuit Blanche. It doesn't really get what I would call as accurately critiqued. So I suspect that such suspicion may be in part because Nuit Blanche's mass appeal collapses the historical divide between the bastions of high art, the museum, gallery, auction house, or art fair, and popular culture, the stadium, television, and large-scale rock and roll concerts. I would propose that such forms of mass communication are distinct from modernist forms of narrative contextualization. In effect, they actually align more precisely with the media of a pre-modern epic orality described by our Canadian theorists, Harold Innis and Marshall McLuhan. And this form of mass media distinguishes the electronic media of the digital age. So here I will explore evidence of what can happen when art moves out of the modernist space of the museum and into the networks of mass culture. The last 10 years of Nuit Blanche in Toronto have marked a significant threshold of an engaged mass art audience where conceptual and event-based artworks have assumed the same kinds of audiences as stadium and political rallies or television. And so as an art historian, I'm interested in studying what this might mean. And it entails a different kind of critique and a different kind of disciplinary approach. But in this case, I'm the curator, but I also tend to self-legitimate my own projects, which is a bit dicey, But because we're doing new things, in order to deliver them, we propose our logic as well. So here we are. There's the people walking up and down Bay Street. So for NIGHTSENSE, we commissioned 15 projects in the financial district, the wind tunnels south of Queen Street bounded by Front, Yonge, and York Streets, with a deliberate and symbolic choice to close down Bay Street, the synecdoche of the national financial industry, and for one night displace it with the economy of art. However, the singularity of our curatorial logic was challenged at times by the omnivorous form of Nuit Blanche itself, including the placements of numerous independent projects, food concession stands, buskers, Nuit Blanche kind of information booths, and so on. That all could have been easily confused as comprising part of our commission projects. In fact, we commissioned a cinematographer to document the projects, and she missed several of them and did like a booth that's, publicity. And, we would have had to just hover like helicopter parents over her, but, that's just life. So we only have a partial record, unfortunately. We commissioned all the artists, and it was our pleasure to work with these really dedicated and talented individuals. And as usual, we chose to work with a balance of people that we knew well and new people. So the people we had trusted relationships with, we could really have a shorthand, because there's a lot of stuff to do for one night. We also had to acknowledge the safety protocols of a huge scale exhibition. We received one proposal from a very brilliant artist who proposed that she would mobilize diverse anarchist groups in the zone within her relational art projects. And while we respected her very much, the potential of these anarchist groups, escalating to sort of violent situations and some kind of riot, and the danger to property and life and limb were too great, so we had to decline the project. So I'm going to start by looking at some of these projects, selective, not all of them are represented. So once we started looking into money, art that had to do with money, we discovered this 1973 piece by a conceptual artist, Ian Baxter Plus. And he's actually changed his name to Ian Baxter Plus as kind of a corporate logo. He's adopted this in his practice. So this is a piece called Monopoly with Real Money, and it was played with $15,000 of the artist's own money in cash. So we loved it because it worked as a contemporary allegory of touch. Many of the historical paintings that are allegories of touch depict money counters, game players, card players, and so forth. So here we are with the Monopoly game. And we really worked very hard to get the Toronto Stock Exchange. And this involved ultimately getting David Miller to write a letter. We were declined like several rounds, but we got this space. So a little context is important, because in Toronto, unlike Wall Street, where you have the trading floor, there's no, in Toronto, it's only a virtual. There's no actual trading floor. It exists virtually. And there's a broadcast center and a related meeting and event space, which are where we had this event. So because now, we thought that it was important to have real money in this piece, because it revived the tangibility of money within the Canadian economy. So following the 2008 market meltdown, staging Monopoly with Real Money the following year drew eerie connections between the 1970s era-defining recession and the fiscal instability within which the installation was situated. Baxter's 1973 performance had originally included such art world's luminaries as collector Murray Frum and Sotheby's managing director David Hilcox. But with access to the city's Rolodex, we thought we'd amplify the celebrity aspect as much as we could. So we ended up by having all these were the players. Richard Florida, who is the author of The Creative Class, the rapper Chaos flew in from Montreal, news anchor Roger Peterson, Gemini, who's a radio host, a DJ named Vaneska, and video on trials Trevor Boris, a comedian. The piece resonated with the media, I think because some of the people were involved in it. And there was a feature in the National Post the night before Nuit Blanche, which went over some of the strategies of these people. They shared their strategies, their desired display pieces for the game, and their favorite properties. So that was great. So here we have a game that you can see here. And we have Massimo Capra, who is a chef, celebrity chef. Roger Mooking, Roger Peterson, who you know probably from, you see his back, he's from City TV, kind of a news anchor. And developer Brad J. Lamb played for some of the games as well. So the purchase, rental, and trading of properties and utilities were incredibly animated with competing strategies of the 26 players who played. Each game had 4 to 6 players, and there were 2-hour cycles for each of the games throughout the night. Okay, so one of my favorite moments was player Sajinta Patel of City TV, who was then doing the weather. And she actually did a live stand-up weather report with her hands full of money as she rolled the dice. So here she is, within a conceptual artwork as part of it. And it's so delightful because so often the media attempts to contain and trivialize artworks. They go, oh, isn't that fun? Or isn't it weird? Oh, well, this is the story of it. But to have her within it and being a participant marked a very interesting moment. And there we are. People were seated in unlikely combinations. And at the end of the night, Ian Baxter Plus took his $15,000 and stuffed it into his hat and walked back to his hotel, much to the consternation of the security people from the city. So here we have David Miller playing banker, which he did for 2 hours, bless his heart. And you can see on the right, standing up with the baseball cap, is Ian Baxter. And then behind, you can see the spectators. So the spectators are looking in. And on the ticker tape, outside and inside, where you usually have stock prices, it had the names of the players. And there were video monitors placed outside, so you could see the table, like a close-up view of the table. Sometimes it got a bit id-like. People would mush their face as the night got later and people are drinking a little more, perhaps. They'd mush their faces on the glass. And one of the celebrities had a restraining order against a stalker who appeared with their picture and was like, doing things and had to be taken away. So all these parts became aspects of the piece, which is, very interesting. And there they are again, a little closer view. Okay, now I'm going to talk about Rebecca Belmore's piece, which is called Gone Indian, that was at the RBC Plaza at Wellington and Bay. Now RB, it's on the building, and her name's Rebecca Belmore, so she liked that. And it featured a van with a home on the res arrangement of chairs on its roof, an amplified sound system and lighting. And this is a collaborative powwow that she undertook with Cree dancer, actor, choreographer, and York professor Michael Greyeyes. Now Michael has starred in a number of romantic Hollywood movies and has quite an interesting fan base. But here he was in full alignment with a powwow. And this is very, very important. And so to the sound of traditional drumming and native hip hop, he danced, while Rebecca carried out a powerful ritual integrating a circle of sage, sweetgrass, and saluting the 4 directions. Then she took a huge stone and undertook the ceremonial grinding of $500 worth of pennies, effectively bending, splitting, and even defiantly defacing the copper coins. The results were left on RBC Plaza after the performance. So there she is. She is very focused. Belmore's intention was to generate enough energy through dance, ritual performance, and Aboriginal music to, I quote, her words, occupy the space, thereby somewhat prophetically anticipating the Occupy movement that was to ferment a few years later. Here we go. Belmore sought to temporarily reclaim what had once been First Nations land by bringing powwow to the district for that night, infusing its energies into the buildings, people, and streets, and invoking an ancestral Aboriginal presence into the site. For Belmore, the fact that powwow had actually happened at RBC Plaza and that people would carry that memory was a key aspect. In this way, the Royal Bank Plaza, along with the streets and sidewalks of the financial district, became the impromptu ground for a restorative performance for spectators of both the past and the present. And now I'm going to talk about Witches' Cradles, which was by an artist collaborative called the Center for Tactical Magic. And it was situated in Brookfield Place, which is off of Bay Street. It's a beautiful atrium with 80-foot arches. So the Center for Tactical Magic are based in California, and they bring together activism with the supernatural, kind of an odd combination. And I quote from them, to channel the specter of paranormal politics. Aaron Gash of the TCM described the Cradles as a form of technology that had originally been a form of soft torture in that it didn't kill people. And it was used to punish those who were accused of witchcraft during the Middle Ages. These gently swaying pods were later reclaimed by the witches themselves when they found that they could be used to induce states of ecstasy and clairvoyance. This is because the gentle swinging affects the vestibular system in very interesting ways, which is your sense of balance and proprioception, which have a relate to intuition. Oh, sorry. So, professional riggers and attendants, oh my gosh, evil coffee, wore paramilitary jumpsuits with CTM patches like airport, ground crews, prison or border guards. One by one, selected audience members could enter and experience the Cradles. Sorry. Liability concerns were extremely acute with this piece. We had an emergency room physician, EMS personnel, and each person was scanned by a metal detector, took a sobriety test, signed a waiver, inserted earplugs, and was blindfolded. And they also had a heart monitor attached to their finger. Then they were hoisted up in a star-shaped pod to sway for 15 minutes. In the Nuit Blanche context of visual and auditory overload, this work used sensory deprivation to bring forth the possibility of altered states. Participants related that they had felt like they were flying or floating. One fellow had an olfactory hallucination of his mother's carrot bread. Others felt that they had been higher in the air than they actually were, while still others lost all sense of time. At the end of their session, participants emerged like chicks from an egg. CTM's intent was to have people look inside as part of an art event, as distinct from turning the attention outward. The artistic and occult technologies involved were meditative, calming, and relieve stress. I circled through the event several times that night, and it was really impressive how the energy shifted over the course of the night. Particularly the care and concentration given the participants by the riggers and caregivers sort of felt kind of like being present at a birth or a death, a life transition. And people were quite moved by the experience of being in the pod. So now we're moving on to another piece, which is entitled Wild Ride. And we deliberately placed Shauna Dempsey and Laurie Milan's Wild Ride on Bay Street, the emblem of Canada's banking industry, which we had closed between Queen and Front. The smell of cotton candy and raucous music filled the air, and two midway rides, Fun Slide and the Avalanche, provided a viscerally haptic experience of the whirling, tilting exhilaration of the bull market and its less than thrilling collapse. Free to the public, the rides were operated by professional carnies who instructed participants and manned the controls. This is the Avalanche, dressed in ill-fitting suits provided by the artist to resemble recently downsized business people. These resonated with CNBC and New York Times features that focus on how downsized executives have been forced to take survival jobs at Coney Island. The rides invited audience members to kinetically experience the ups and downs of the recent economic crisis and one of my brightest moments, you can see the banks are in the background, right? We have the Bank of Montreal. One of my brightest moments was leaving Monopoly with Real Money and just walking along this street and hearing the screams of people on the Avalanche as we were approaching Bay Street. So with the Avalanche, it was very intensely kinetic, and you were in this ride that was just gravitationally messing with your sense of balance, and these Carnies were really getting into it. They were teasing, cajoling the audience, and perhaps even psychotrophically inspired akin to a coked-up stockbroker. Because no one paid for the rides, they were free to lengthen the duration beyond the normal 5 minutes. And I think I was probably on there for 15 minutes and quite green around the gills when I finally stepped off. It took about a half an hour to recover. And there was also these sort of other things that had been rented from the company. Clowns had garbage cans, and some people took them off and put them on their heads. And these are posters that were posted in the area, which sort of design-wise appropriates some of the typography from the circus. Okay. Oh, just before I go on, I forgot to say that these rides on Bay Street became kind of a backdrop for a lot of political people that gave interviews to the media. So we had David Miller, but also Jack Layton gave some comments, and Pinball Clemens as well. And Dempsey and Milan's pithy comments about the work were featured on The National. Okay, now we're into Fastworm's piece. So it's entitled Scribe Pod, Fastworms. So as we were developing our curatorial take on the financial district, several stories appeared in the Toronto Star and New York Times stating that astrologers and psychics were doing a lucrative business with business clients. And this was 2009, just after the financial crisis of 2008. So having the talented artist witches, Fastworms, give their characteristic psychic readings seemed an ideal fit. Indeed, according to the event horoscope that Fastworms had cast that night for Nuit Blanche, Pluto, the planet organizing finance, destruction, regeneration, power, struggles, and transformation, was exalted in the 8th house governing money and augmented by its angle to a full moon that culminated at 6 in the morning. In a district that is virtually devoid of nature, the courtyard of the Sheridan Center is a relative oasis. Its glassed-in waterfalls, courtyard, and gardens were recast as a zone of divinatory encounters, as distinct from workaday meetings of Bay Street traders. The title of the piece, Scribe Pod, derived from an Old English word. Scry is a method for clairvoyance achieved by gazing into a reflective and flickering surface, such as a water, candle flame, or crystal balls. As a part of their production process, Fastworms worked with an IT expert to develop a tarot reading app that could be activated using the shake function of the iPhone or iPod. For Fastworms, tarot readings entails an ethics where true prosperity is only gained by enhancing the personal freedom and well-being of others. The sounds of intimate speech and the constant waterfall were important components for bringing participants into an intensified present where intuition is enacted and conveyed. So there they are. And here we have Anna Frizz's piece, Respire. So this is a piece that used the radio waves of the district. And what she did was all these little hanging things you see illuminated in the space are radio receivers, and they were suspended above people's heads. As you walked into the sonic environment of this beautiful deco arcade on Yonge Street, you would hear sort of the sounds that are often taken out of radio, like the sounds of people breathing or phatic utterances. Oops, what do I do here? Just close it. Hit the X, okay. Come on. Okay, there we go. So you walk in, and then there's this kind of, just the radio sounds itself, like static, different kinds of static and little leaps and so forth. So this milieu of harmonic interference and uneasily nighttime respiration revealed the normally invisible and inaudible contours of the surrounding soundscape. So here it's a little closer. So it's really lovely work. Romanian artist Dan Mihilshanu installed a reflecting pool of 80-proof vodka situated on the pristine floor of the CIBC Bank atrium at Commerce Court. Throughout his career, Mihilshanu has explored the processes of distillation. This work was a meditation on the volatile and symbolic qualities of 80-proof vodka. Liquor and liquidity bear more than passing associations to banks and money. Intoxicating, like the euphoria of riches, evaporating, like the vanishing of investments during economic downturns, and alchemical, like the transformation of use value into exchange value. In black markets and other underground economies, the connections are even more literal. Within extended conflicts, wars, or totalitarian regimes, such as that which the artist lived through in Romania during Nicolae Ceausescu's regime, alcohol serves as both an emotional escape and a home-brewed currency for procuring essential goods and services. So people make their own vodka and trade it for essential services. It surprised us ultimately that Vodka Pool, which is such a beautifully calm visual piece, became the most raucous, of the whole, of all the projects. People, I think it's the smell of the alcohol perhaps, people threw money, their house keys, condoms, they body surfed through it, dogs ran through it, and at one point in the night it had to be closed down because the door was ripped off of Commerce Court during a near riot. I was crazy, and such a beautiful piece. But anyway, this is it. And at the end, he took all the coinages, like filled his whole bathtub. Like he had everything, all these things. And that'll be another piece that he makes. Next piece is Imminent Departure, Heather Nichols' piece at Union Station. And she has a piece now at In Futures that just got written up in the New York Times, actually. And she lived through 9/11, had been living in New York for a long time, moved to Toronto shortly after that, the attacks on the trade towers. And so life-changing upheavals, that are caused by either personal, economic, or historical events were key to this piece. She had the entire Grand Hall of Union Station, and she chose to reflect on the countless stories of fortune hunting, last-minute escapes, missed connections, lovers' reunions, hitting the road, and being run out of town. The space was transformed by a sound, lighting, and atmospheric installation to evoke the romance and heartbreak of travel stories brought about by unforeseen crises. So the sound work that she did had actors and children and people acting these roles of leaving and arriving and what was happening. So there's that sound element. Along with those stories was this really extraordinary use of tuba and like very huge speakers within a shock and awe cycle of sound. So once in a while, the tuba would just, really loud, bone-shaking loud in the space. It's so resonant. And then the soundscape was also punctuated by high decibel screeching train engines, brakes, and whistles that cut immediately to darkness and silence. It's very dramatic. There are a range of reactions to this piece. Until midnight, via travelers arriving from the trains became accidental participants as they transited the installation. And after midnight, crowds began lying down on the smooth marble floor, softening and calming the mood. Santiago Sierra, I think it's contagious. I've got the throat thing too. Santiago Sierra. His works characteristically address structures of power. He's a Mexican artist. And the piece, we didn't know what he was going to be doing until the night of Nuit Blanche. He didn't unveil the title. And what it ended up being was a flatbed truck with no written on it, very large exclamation that rested on this flatbed, and is offered to the evening as a form of refusal and political dissent. In this context of the financial district and its hyper-developed financial interests, it sort of addressed that. But this was the first stop in a North American tour to art world venues in New York and Washington, including detours through dilapidated urban zones reflecting the hardships wrought by deindustrialization, outsourcing, and real estate foreclosures. They are very interested in getting to Detroit, for example. The work's travels were documented by an artist's team of cinematographers to produce a film which circulates today. So here we have it at Nuit Blanche. It became kind of a photo op for people, and then here it is in Times Square as it's traveling throughout North America. And Che-Chen Wang did a piece, I'll just briefly touch on this, called 10 Cents, which involved SCENTS, not cents as in pecuniary sense. 10 portable porta potties were placed just outside of Union Station, but they were filled with unlikely materials and not really to be used as porta potties. They were rather inspired by the adventures of Alice in Wonderland. And so you could open the doors and there'd be smells and there'd be little sort of poetic things to read, and you could do them all. But unfortunately, as the night progressed, as you can see on the right, it did get used. 2 of them got used and they had to be taped off, and you can see they weren't functioning. There's sort of a stain on the ground there. So then just a few more projects. Melissa Brown, whom I met at Banff, did a great piece called How to Win the Lottery. And it was set up as an all-night lecture at First Canadian Place, which focused on strategies for how you could win Lotto 649. Of course, for a growing number of economically distressed citizens, the lottery has become the last best hope for financial security. And Brown's distinctive lecture combines several personas, demonstrations, and workshops to coach the audience in visualizing techniques and scientific and intuitive contingencies to actual lottery wins. So she has identified the role that lunar cycles and telekinesis can play in generating successful numbers. So here's her piece. And Brad Todd, a Montreal artist, Red TV, was a piece that adopted the signals from financial news programming, and the color of debt is red, and then the whole projection is sort of like very scintillating, kind of like a television set with static, and it was this beautiful orb-like projection projected from inside a building. And it's kind of a meditation on the circulations of blood, information, and finance. And then finally, this is my last one. I'll take a sip. How are we doing? Am I way over, or is it? Okay, I have just a few more things. Okay, so like Anna Friz, Ryan Steck's piece also used airwaves. And in this case, we were able to use and program the landmark CN Tower to pulsate from dawn to dusk, rather from dusk to dawn, in sync with a simultaneous CIUT 89.5 FM radio broadcast. So audiences from throughout Toronto could tune into a citywide synesthetic experience involving the 553-meter landmark signifier of the city, with high-energy electronic mixes of DJ jokers of the scene and the moody ambient music of If Then Do. The operations manager of the CN Tower, Tom Mellon, collaborated wholeheartedly in Steck's piece, and they worked together in a hotel room with a view of the tower in the manner of DJs orchestrating the tower as screen. This is the first time the iconic tower had been given over to an artist and to Nuit Blanche, and for an artistic project. It featured the then new Color Kinetics LED lighting system And Steck worked with a palette of 9,000 pixels, 6 effects, including sending JPEG images through the tower's lighting matrix. So this was visible from throughout the city. And I could show you now, if I can escape this guy. And, where's my thing? I can show you a little bit of this. And we'll just look at it. It's ambient, but you can get a sense of the feeling of it. So it's really beautiful. So I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit. You can see the different moods. Often there'd be no light. And then there'd be some. This is filmed from Toronto Island, of course.